Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Techno Brew. I'm so excited about this. I've got three of my favorite people here to talk about the evolution of AI, pioneering ethical innovation, and understanding AI as a partner. This has been something that's kind of been in the works for a while. It's morphed into different conversation, I guess, formats, and I'm really glad that we landed on this in particular because we're kind of going through a really interesting time, 2025, being the year of the AI agent. Everyone, Microsoft just recently with Agent 365 in November, Salesforce acquiring Spindle AI, Google with their Vector AI, Agent Builder, and then umpteen other organizations launching and deploying AI agents across the board. Um, really interesting stuff, cool stuff, and also I guess some cautionary tales in the making, especially when you consider cybersecurity vulnerabilities and the literal blowing up of identities for every employee in your organization. You've already got probably like 10 different IDs, from device to human IDs to I guess service accounts and vendor IDs, and now you've got potentially an additional three, four, five, 10 AI agents that you're adding to that. And when you look at an organization level, what a nightmare that creates just from a security perspective. But I don't want to go down a rabbit hole too soon. So let's maybe start with some introductions, and I want to start with Anshula. Anshula, thanks for joining us. Anshula is a serial founder who's built several AI platforms. Her latest, a Canadian, helping Canadian companies access R&D tax credits entirely from scratch. She's an avowed non-coder, so she taught herself to code, build production AI systems, starting with zero technical background. She is the former CEO of Symmetrica, where she worked with asset managers measuring over 150 billion in ESG reporting. She brings deep domain expertise and a unique perspective on making AI practical and accessible. And she's teaching social impact measurement at the University of Toronto. So that gives her and us really some valuable insight into how we can measure and communicate the value that AI creates. And she's living proof that you don't need to be a computer scientist, although she is going to be pursuing a master's, I think, in comp sci soon. So awesome. And then next we've got Erin Peterson, and Erin, represents a fantastic intersection of technical expertise and legal thinking. And you started as a software engineer at Distributive, um, and you decided to kind of pivot. I guess you were building AI systems, leading the AI task force, and you realized that maybe the tech was advancing faster than our frameworks to govern it. So um, fascinating move and a bold move to now you're in your second year of law school, and you're also running Integrity AI, which is a consultancy that helps organizations implement AI governance from day one. Um, and you've worked hands-on building distributed machine learning systems and served as an AI ethicist, and understand, I guess, what's technically possible and what guardrails need to exist. So, thank you so much for being with us, Erin. And next, Philippe, hey Philippe, a true pioneer in Canadian AI. You're a founding member of Google Chrome's machine learning team. You helped one of the co-founders of Element AI alongside Joshua Bengio. And you've kind of come full circle where you kind of collaborating with him again
That's right.
at LawZero, which I think is really awesome. And clearly that was a relationship that the story arc was yet to be written when you first met. So you have a PhD in machine learning and physics simulation, over 25 published papers, and your experience again spanning from Google, multiple startups, and most recently, as I said, collaborating uh, with Yasha Benjo and the team at LawZero. And now you're self-professed rewilded entrepreneur.
Yep.
Yeah, exploring the ethics landscape. So I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation, and I'd love too that you've seen AI evolve from multiple angles. Like you built ML systems before the current AI boom, so you understand where, not just where we are, but how we got here, and maybe patterns that keep repeating. We're so grateful to have you here. You serve on the International Center of Expertise in Montreal on artificial intelligence on the board, and the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So you give us wonderful insight. Thank you all for joining me.
Really
It's such an
excited to
honor.
be here. Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Carlos,
Carlos.
for having me.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, thank you. So I wanted to, I guess, maybe start off a little light. It's kind of got really intense really quick, but I was just wondering maybe how did each of you start with your AI story? What was the moment, I guess, you realized that AI might define your career, or did you kind of stumble into it? And what are you working on today? You want to start, Anshula?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, I think everyone kind of heard of AI over the last couple of years. My moment really came when I made the decision to shut down Symmetrica. And in doing that, I ended up actually just spending some time with family, and perhaps nerddom kind of runs in the genes, or at least in choice of in-laws, because one of my cousin-in-laws is kind of he's used to run he's an AI software sort of guy, and we used to nerd out. We still nerd out quite a bit. And during this family vacation, he kept like coming up to me and being like, "I've got this slide deck. I really would love to show you." And so finally, I was like, "All right, Carl, show me your slide deck." And it was basically his thoughts about AI and how it would really carve away at the what we currently understand as the labor economy, but also the impacts in terms of productivity, et cetera. And my educational background is in economics, so I was obviously fascinated, had lots of time on my hands, and decided to start playing around with large language models. And that turned into a whole thing because, first I started with ChatGPT. I think that's probably kind of the gateway for a lot of people, and then started vibe coding, and then very quickly found that it was my apps were falling apart very quickly, and then got really, really deep into software architecture, really, really deep into software sort of just coding, and then reading academic papers wherever I could, and understanding how transformers work, and like BERT versus not double transformers. And that's become something that I'm really interested in and excited by, and I just love that there's like a huge knowledge base that you have to kind of keep sucking in, and whatever, and obviously being able to also code apps as personal projects and things like that has been, and some of them being acquired, etc., being really, really exciting and interesting. So that was my gateway.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. And Erin.
Yeah, for sure. So I went to Queen's University, where the first year is a general engineering. Sorry if my dog's barking, she hears
No,
me.
no worries, no worries.
And basically, I took my first coding course in this year of school, and I loved it. Like, I never thought I'd be a developer. And then I kind of took that and went with it and looked at what I could do with a programming background. And I found AI. This was before generative AI or anything like that, but I kind of dove right in and made that my thing. I joined the AI club and self-taught how to code AI, actually, and then pursued that and got my internship in AI, and then further worked at Distributive. I started to then look into like the ethics of it and realized that there was no rules governing what people were doing.
Ouch.
Exactly. And decided I needed to take a stance in that and look at what we could do with that. So I did some consultation on the AIDA before it got thrown out, and this inspired me to go to law school to further pursue a path within AI governance. And now, I founded Integrity AI, where I do governance consulting for corporations and municipalities.
Cool.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and I love that you mentioned AIDA. It was a shame that Bill C-27 was, shut down when government prorogued in January. But I guess we'll circle back to that. And Philippe.
Yeah, my story with AI, I guess, it goes back to when I was quite young. Actually, I think I've always loved the idea of like intelligence, but even beyond that, like what makes us who we are. And I always felt that I always loved computer too. I'm this mix of a nerd who likes poetry and humans and like this weird thing. And I
Yeah.
always felt there was something I would call functional in us, right? It's not
Yeah.
about, like, it is about how we are and how we're built, but it's mostly about how we operate with each other, the words we use, the gesture we take, and all of that. And I think this is the underlying thread. And I've been asking myself that very question when I look back at my trajectory, and this is what I find. So I think my transition through the world of computer science, where I did my PhD, the fact that my postdoc was in simulated robotics, where we were trying to build like primitive minds so that these robots could stand on two legs and walk, and it would fall on their face, and we would laugh, and we would try to make them better, and it would fall again. And this entire process for me is discovering what intelligence is. And I would say today more than that, what's beyond intelligence, and what makes it so much fun to be ourselves and to be together. And that's been the underlying thread. But it's also been a story of uh, unpredicted wonder and unpredicted concerns. The thing is, you embark on that journey saying, hey, I'm going to code a mind. And then you do. And you don't realize what it actually means. So Yasha Benjo, you mentioned him earlier. Like, we go back. Like, he was my teacher when I was doing my undergrad, and he helped me during my grad school, and we've always been coming back together. And this is the thing I think that unites us the most. It's this, weird desire to figure out what the mind is at the functional level, so that we can build a computer that imitates it and eventually becomes it, maybe. But it's also this whoa moment where it actually happens and we don't understand how and why. Um, and this mix of the desire to discover and the wonder that comes when you do is my story of AI. So it's bouncing back between these moments of excitement and let's, figure out the next stage, and these moments of, whoa, something is working. What does it mean? And these what does it mean have become more and more deep for me. At first it was just like, what does it mean to be intelligent? And now it's actually, what does it mean to be human? And that's just a fascinating question. So yes, I would say I'm an AI scientist, and the rewilded for me is essentially going back to the roots, to philosophy, if you want, or to human relationships. And so I'm really excited to be living these days at the intersection of these two things.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how you mentioned. You said you take a functionalist view, which is kind of what Blaise Aguirre-Yarcas takes as well. The CTO of Technology and Society at Google, and he's a friend of yours, contemporary. You guys have similar thoughts on that. And I guess maybe without going too deep into it, he has this thing that he says about everything alive is a computer, and so he's kind of, I find him like he's kind of in the middle, where you've got Jeffrey Hinton, who's very, sees AI as an existential threat, and then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, you've got Sam Altman, who's like, yeah, let's get AGI going by 2030, and then you've got like yourself and Blaise and probably Benjo as well in the middle there, with Sundar Pichai, kind of taking more of like a cautious approach, perhaps, or maybe I don't know. It's such a spectrum that I think I'm butchering my whole statement here. But
no. I mean, you're capturing the essence of it, and you're also capturing the complexity of it. It's hard to put on a line what people believe and where people are. Like, I personally take an approach where we need a lot of people with a lot of beliefs and ideas to explore that space. I think traditionally in academia, in particular, in business too, we've taken that mind that if our idea is good, we need to be such strong advocates for it that it almost feels like we believe it's the only idea worth pursuing. I've decided not to be like that. I've decided to say, hey, there's something that calls me. It's this weird intersection of AI, intelligence, consciousness, all of that. But it's not the only thing. There are a lot of pressing problems that a lot of people need to look into. It just so happens that my trajectory in life landed me here with that particular enthusiasm, that particular excitement. I think it's worth looking into. I think we should devote some of our attention and resources to that, but I'm not saying it's the only thing. Who am I to know, right? What I believe above everything else is, in order for us to be stable as a society, we need a diversity of belief. We need a diversity of people. We need to sample from all of that, to use a very AI term, right? We need to make sure everybody has a voice, everybody has a chance to talk, to be heard. If they don't agree with me, if they think differently, I think it's great. We should also listen to them. But hey, if you ask me, my passion these days is in this weird mix of being aware there are risks, and so we should invest a little bit in control, but also being aware that we're on the verge of discovering something beautiful. And I have this weird intuition that it's gonna be fine. I'm not entirely sure why, but I have this deep held belief that when you put two humans together and you remove a lot of the structures we invented around them, they tend to be really nice to each other. And so that's what I'm interested in. Like, what is the process behind people being nice to each other naturally? And
Yeah.
wow, like, is this something that can be emergent naturally in systems? And I actually, the latest research I've been doing with Blaise in particular and his team at Google tend to show that yes, maybe there is some weird mathematical properties of systems like LLM that make these benevolent behavior emerge naturally.
It's interesting to me that you talk about an age of stability with AI, because to me this is a very like Schumpeterian moment where we are seeing creative destruction, and there will be quite a bit of instability, not only in markets but in
Right.
society. And I think that the conversation around ethical AI tends to be kind of at two levels. One is at this level of what will happen to society at large, and then also how do we use it in our day-to-day life, knowing that the current version of kind of generative AI that we're seeing was created on the back of IP theft and has like huge environmental implications and all that. Like every time I use AI, and I use it a lot, I do have to remind myself that I'm essentially using a small country's worth of water in a year just by using it as much as we are. And I think that is hard to reconcile until you start thinking, well, it is hard to reconcile for sure.
Yeah.
But if you, one of the things that excites me about AI is this vision of a future where, like, what if we can actually unlock new materials innovation, or like new energy innovation? What if we end up actually being able to create like a safe nuclear power as a result? And what if things like space travel all of a sudden become much more ethical and much more possible? But we're not there yet, and
No.
it does scare me in the day to day that I use AI a lot, and like I know this is bad, but it's also so transformative. How do you reconcile that as an individual, while also recognizing that this is a moment of deep instability, caused partially by AI?
Very,
And so I
yeah.
think
So
interesting-
go, Erin. Yes.
I just think a lot of the like bright future that you talk about there will not stem from AGI itself. Those are more like specific use cases where a model could be trained directly for that purpose. So this big push towards AGI, I don't necessarily see those in specific benefits coming from that.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see where that side of things goes. But I think AI itself, and even generative AI, has a really, really high potential to create those benefits if it's people looking at those problems specifically, not just letting a general intelligence loose on all problems necessarily.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very Sundar Pichai kind of perspective, and Joshua Benjo as well, because his concerns being around public safety and also loss of control potentially with things like AGI. But Yeah, Philippe, I think you were going to add to that too.
No, I just wanted to say, like, the way in which I reconcile these questions is I actually I don't. No, but
I love it.
I'm you know I think I reconcile them by saying I'm wrong, right? And I'm
Right.
wrong. I don't know the next step. I'm dreaming of a future that's post instability, right? Things like this shit will hit the fan. I'm really sorry, right? The way we've built society and we've designed it and everything we've structured, like you were talking about IP laws, we can talk about like these huge corporations who are controlling like almost everything when it comes to AI. Like clearly this cannot hold. Like, but I don't know how it breaks. I
Yeah.
know it breaks. I'm pretty sure it does, and I'm pretty sure that when it does, it's gonna hurt and it's gonna be difficult, and we'll have to figure it out. I'm pretty confident that we will.
Yeah.
We're creative. We'll roll up our sleeves. We'll get together. You know, some things will break. Some things will get fixed. I don't know how it works, but I think we'll
Yeah.
get there. But what I'm really interested about is this longer term future, the one that scares Joshua a little bit when he talks about loss of control. And this is where I'm slowly starting to envision something better, something that is not AI everywhere, humans nowhere, or something like. I
Yeah.
think it's more of an ecosystem that can work somehow. It's still very iffy, but I think we can see glimpses of it. So yeah, in short, I do think we need people like you, Erin, people like you, Anshula, to look at it day to day. But I guess yeah, what makes me more hopeful is I think the long game is going to work.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that the three of you are here because I see you all as like representatives with different weighting in terms of like building, governing, and measuring. You've all had a hand in all three to a certain degree, but I feel like and please correct me if I'm wrong, but Erin, I see you as like this governance, like you will be like kind of like I'm looking at you for governance, and Philippe, maybe for building, and Anshula, you've got that building and measuring expertise as well. Because you mentioned something about like every time you use AI. Today, I was using AI and I was thinking about, oh, there's a coffee cup, there's a cup of coffee that was made, like just for this one tiny query, and it's such an abstract thought that hits my brain and then immediately is gone, and I like you said, I don't think about it, Philippe, because it's kind of a heavy thought when you think about what are the implications for other communities that are like neighboring these massive farms basically that are just chewing up infrastructure and resources, and it doesn't bear thinking sometimes. So
I mean,
um,
so on the measurement piece, it is kind of top of mind for me because I'm actually thinking through this right now in a couple
yeah,
of scenarios, but just and other people have made this point. This is not like a pure genius or anything, but there is a local maximum, right? Where even though you're using AI and it takes a coffee cup of water or whatever the case may be, let's say that you make an app in a week versus 6 months. There is a local maximum where actually it's better that you use AI just from a pure energy utilization perspective, because the amount of energy you used is less than if you'd taken the 6 months to do it, right? And so there are places where AI, even today, have the potential to save energy, which to me, I think anyone who cares about climate change, this is obviously a big concern, and just water, like the health of water systems and health of communities and all that stuff is obviously something that's top of mind. However, we're not measuring that right now. And I do think that's like a very practical thing that people can do, because there are ways for us to measure these things. And in fact, there's like other platforms out there that do measure this exact thing. But you can also kind of create one for yourself if you need to. So there are places where it can be useful. And one of the other things, and I'm sure both Erin and Philippe will have a lot more to say about this from a technical perspective and kind of more in depth. But I mean, DeepSeek to me is really interesting because it's become much more efficient in its use of energy. And so I do think that we are going to see, and there's lots of graphs showing, level of compute has reduced per query. I think we are going to see the right direction of travel on that. I don't know how you get around the IP theft. I know that Claude recently, got, what was it, $3,000 per book for each one that they used for their training models. So maybe Philippe is right. Maybe we're going to figure this out and everyone's going to come out of it slightly better. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think a pillar of like my life and my company as well that isn't necessarily captured in governance is the AI literacy side of things. I think that things are changing really, really quickly, and a majority of the world and Canada isn't aware of what's happening or what's going to be coming. So I think doing things like this and working on teaching people, and especially kids as well. I've worked with NGOs to teach kids about how AI is impacting what they see on their feeds, how things aren't necessarily true when they see them. And I think this AI literacy portion is almost equally as important as the governance portion, because people won't speak out if they don't know what's happening at all and aren't aware of like what concerns might be coming.
Yeah, 100%. I want to like maybe so I just on that thought. Thanks for bringing that up, Erin, because I hadn't considered the AI literacy part of it in all of it as a kind of like a component, a key component, really, I guess, to kind of tie things together. But Philippe, I wanted to start with you, just from like from a build lens and going from kind of theory to reality, and maybe you're again this venture scientist recently rewilded, put back, and entrepreneurially, I guess, seeking positive societal impact. What I guess you had this fascinating chronicle about conversations where it felt like AI had gone beyond being a simple tool and more like a partner.
Yes.
And maybe that's kind of like, Erin, you're kind of, I hope I'm phrasing this correctly, but you're helping individuals and young minds kind of understand how to use or partner with AI, I guess, in a responsible and safe way. And Philippe, I just want to know, like, what was this? I guess, was there a specific moment where you saw this shift in your perspective? Like, you had gone beyond the tool.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been a slow journey towards that. I was talking with Blaise Aguirre-Yarkas recently, and he said that he had similar experience. And at some point, when you use it a lot, you start to try to understand the system behind, but you try to understand it not in the way an AI scientist would. I know how transformer architectures work, but if I were a neurosurgeon or a neuroscientist, I would know roughly how a brain works, but that's not the knowledge I would use to talk with you today, right? The knowledge I use is acquired differently. It's acquired through a bunch of interactions with you, with different people, and I know the effect my words has on them, and I know how to be nice and kind in a conversation, to leave room, to take some, to expose idea, to let other expose there. So we know all of that about humans, not because we understand how brains work, but because we've been together long enough to internalize these behaviors, right? And the thing is, when you work with AI enough at the prompt level, especially in long conversations, you start to model these systems a bit like that, right? And this is where the words that Blaise used and that echo mine is, it feels like there's someone inside, like a ghost in the machine or whatever you want to call that, right? And that's this weird thing where, okay, maybe it's just it's just some weird thing now. Will it grow? How will it grow? What is it even for us? What makes us recognize each other in this way so that we give each other names and we take care of our identities and all of that, right? So this is what threw me into the philosophy of the mind, which is a very, very large field with a large of interesting philosophers in there. And I've been talking to a lot of them recently about both classic philosophies of mind and emerging ones that we can maybe learn about from these interactions with LLM. So that's one of the fascinating aspects I've been interested in, that came from these very long interactions where I don't think too much about the environmental impact. I kind of agree with Anshula there that, I think right now we're building these systems like very complex, very big. I think we're doing it for the wrong reason. We're doing it to save company money and stuff like that. I don't think this is what we'll do in the end. But right now, unfortunately, when I do a request on ChatGPT, it does use a lot of energy. So I'm really hoping we go beyond that and we go back to simpler models. We're seeing them emerge more and more and more. I truly believe the future has much smaller, much simpler models. Like we can do a lot as humans with very little energy. I think that's a much better model than what we've built now for AI.
Yeah, I love that you kind of talk about how AI kind of presents itself conversationally, and then you kind of juxtapose that with what's happening technically, and there's a separation between the two, and they don't necessarily like you don't need one versus the other
That's
to
right.
kind of like get this experience. Angela, you're an avowed non-coder, but yet you've built a number of solutions essentially by managing AI agents. So when you're you know working on your latest project, does it feel like you're coding, or does it feel like you're managing? Like
Yeah, I mean, like I have started coding. I
you
think it's
have, okay.
yeah. I think I remember saying this to you in April, and probably because to me, it's always felt like software developers are kind of obviously present company accepted, but it's being somewhat misogynistic and like not a great community in a lot of ways. And so, but I mean, yeah, like I spent a lot of time doing it, and I have started to learn the syntax and yes, yes, I guess now I am a coder, but in my own way, I'm a rewilded coder, to use Philippe's answer. But actually, sorry, I wanted to go back to something that Philippe said because I thought it was really interesting. And Philippe, I feel like you've done a lot more thinking about this, so this is a selfish question because I wanted to hear what you have to say about it. But something I was thinking about the last couple of weeks is how ineffectual the Turing test actually has ended up being in terms of understanding whether or not something is actually conscious.
Yeah.
And I remember even, 3 or 4 years ago, it was like there were so many tests to try and figure this out. And now it's like, I mean, clearly, in my opinion, large language models are not conscious. They are not they are not the same as humans, but they're very, very good at pretending they are. But it sounds like maybe you have a slightly different take, or maybe you don't. Maybe, I'm just really curious to hear what you have to say about that.
It's very briefly. This is still being worked on, but the hypothesis is anchored in something called functionalism, and we call it relationalism. And the idea is that a lot of behavior or a lot of characteristics we believe exist in people themselves actually are born from relationships between people,
Right.
and so identity or the fact that we grant consciousness to someone has more to do with the relationships we have or the relationships we observe than it has to do with something within the system, right? And a classic example would be, imagine that a civilization, so there are a bunch of neuroscientists who have been studying the brain in order to figure out what in the brain makes us conscious, right? So there are a bunch of leading theories about consciousness markers, they call them, something like global workspace theory. There are a couple of others. And these are what I would call white box approaches to consciousness, like trying to figure out what in there makes it conscious. I think it's interesting, but I don't believe this is how we grant consciousness to something.
Right.
I think we do it with a black box way, and the thought experiment of an alien civilization is the best for that. If an alien civilization came and we saw that they had developed society, that they were treating each other with care, they were saying, I love you, they were doing all of these things that humans do, we wouldn't need to open their brain to grant them consciousness. We would just say these things are conscious, these things are worthy of care, right? These beings, we didn't call them things, we would call them beings. And we wouldn't have to open their brain. And if at some point we open their brain and we see, oh shit, it was an LLM all along, we would be like, okay, LLMs are conscious, right? So there, you could say, hey, it's impossible that this would be an LLM. What I'm saying is, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's impossible that an LLM could be there and could develop into these complex societies with complex social rules and complex relationships if we remove some of the guardrails, for example, or we let them evolve, or we build them differently. I'm not sure that today they wouldn't do that. And as a result, I don't have an answer to your question, but I find that approaching it, the question of consciousness, instead of approaching it first with the question, is the being conscious? Instead, we ask it, are these two beings considering each other conscious? then I find that you can make more progress if you look at it from a relational angle. And then the question is the being conscious is essentially saying, if two copies of the being are in the same room, will they eventually consider each other conscious? And so that's how we're thinking about it. It's a slightly different approach. We're working on the paper. Like, so it should be interesting when it comes out. But yes, this is a variation on some of the leading theories of mind. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah. Wow. Erin, when you hear Philippe and Andrew describing the shift, and I wonder what your own thoughts are. What does the engineer in you get excited about this conversation? And then how does the law student, I guess, and you see, I guess, liability or what does it spark in you, I suppose?
My first thought is actually excitement. I really love the ability to have such an easy access to innovation. Even what Anshula said about it kind of being a barrier to entry into this like software development field, I really felt that. And I know a lot of people like me felt that trying to get into this field. And the groups I was working with weren't like me necessarily. So the fact that people can go on their own and work through this process and take this big learning curve and actually see results rather than starting from the very basics of how to code, which is something that a lot of women don't dive into because of what's been built up around it. Really broadens this access to innovation. And I think that's also true like throughout the whole world now. So now a lot more people have this ability to dive into creating their own startup in tech and developing an app when maybe that wouldn't have been the case. So my first feeling is excitement in terms of using AI as a partner. But all these concerns we brought up, I think that a lot of governance structures are needed, particularly around how there are so few companies kind of building towards this and putting things out that people can use, but also between IP and then the environment as well. So I have a lot of concerns pretty much in line with like how Jeffrey Hinton has described things about where AI is going and what it could do. But I think that if people are aware of that, it's also the AI literacy portion. Like people developing AI aren't all aware of these concerns. It's a really like move fast, break things environment. So if people are aware of that and it starts to be built into the design process rather than looking back at what was built and seeing how can we make that ethical, then I think these good benefits will outweigh the negative.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And I guess on that note, because you just mentioned that that's a pretty dangerous gap, I suppose, potentially, between how engineers are building AI and how I guess maybe the governance or regulation kind of that's missing. I guess to the guardrails, perhaps. What does your AI governance toolkit look like in that case? And if a CEO was watching this, what would be the first thing that you, from a legal perspective, would impress upon them to create?
So from a legal perspective in Canada, there's no laws right now. So I wouldn't necessarily take the stance as it's a legal perspective. But if you're looking at what is being put in place around the world, I know that a lot of companies are looking to become in line with that so that one, just to have AI governance so that AI doesn't ruin their company for one reason or another. The next is for incoming regulation, which will come, or operation through other countries where there is already regulation. So I would say that it would start with knowing where AI is used within your company, and then having a full tracking system of all the AI in operation, which is like general purpose Gen AI being used by your staff and also like in procurement and in hiring and actual AI systems that are built into your processes.
Yeah.
And then the next step would be working on like a risk management framework with these AI tools. So that would look like having a way to score the tools, which is something that I build with Integrity AI when I work with companies. So this risk scoring tool and framework, and then mitigating factors that would need to come into place after you get a risk score that is of a certain height. So this would allow for, you could use this AI product still, even though it is a higher risk, but it would require, say, a human in the loop or additional testing. And then also looking at using like something like sandboxes to do testing outside of any sort of operational impact so that you can have something in operation and give it some time to see how it's impacting things before it's actually making decisions on real people. But all these things are what I look at with integrity AI, and it really is company or corporation specific to what they're using, what they already have, and if they are looking to like take off and implement AI everywhere and get all these benefits, or if they just are scared of what's coming and want to have good systems in place so they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Philippe, from your recent collaboration with LawZero, how do we prevent, I guess, um, regulatory capture? Kind of like because it's not there right now everywhere. I guess there's some, like for example in California, I love how they have that AI bias and anti-discrimination. I guess law, I suppose, that pertains to automated decisions when it comes to hiring and sort of combating AI bias. Um, I
Yeah,
guess from your perspective, what.
I mean, I'm not an expert on this. I've been briefed on the EU AI law a little bit, which I find interesting. I think maybe because it's in the EU, it hasn't been captured as much as what you see in the US with the power of the large tech corporations here,
Yeah,
um, Canada and the US. But so yeah, I think you can look at what's going there. I think we can have little alarm bells that go off when very powerful people say regulation is not the way to go. It's slowing down innovation. All of this, like I think we should be very careful when we listen to this discourse. Like, I mean, it is a balance. It's true that you can slow things down to the point where it slows to a crawl, but it's also true that you know tech and relentless growth for the sake of growth shouldn't be driving our quest for a beautiful future, right? There is something about the belief that are driving the large companies right now that just feels unhealthy or feels opposed to human flourishing. And I think a lot of when you hear Yeshua talk or Jeff Hinton, like deep down that's what they're trying to express, this discomfort, this tension between the way we're running the world and what we consider beautiful or human flourishing or a future we would be proud of, we would want for our kids, for our grandkids. So yeah, like for me, it's more like I listen to my inner compass a lot when it comes to judging these statements. And so sometimes I hear a VC that goes all out about all kind, against all kind of regulation. Like, nah, doesn't sound right. At the same time, sometimes I hear someone say, "Oh yeah, block down everything, shut down everything, nobody touches AI anymore." Like, doesn't sound right either. The
yeah,
truth is
yeah,
somewhere in the middle. It's uncomfortable because I cannot define it very precisely with rules that would make everybody happy. But I decided I can trust my inner compass a little bit more when it comes to these
sure,
questions. And sometimes I encourage others. I mean, Erin, you were talking about literacy. For me, it's the biggest point because I think if you learn, if you're not afraid of it, if you are finding someone who can help you understand it a little bit better, maybe not as a neuroscientist, I was saying, right? Maybe not as a computer scientist, but as someone who interacts with systems like that, well, then your moral compass becomes better. You become better at making judgment calls on what should be regulated, how should we use it. I had this beautiful discussions with my daughter 2 days ago. She's studying humanities in Halifax at a place called King's College. And she told me, I hope her prof is not listening, but she told me, "Dad, I used AI." And she was a bit ashamed of it. And I was like, well, let's dive into this. Let's try to understand why you did it, why you have that feeling of shame. And what we ended up with is, I mean, there is an inner drive in all of us. Like, she didn't use it for the class she loves, for the class she's passionate about and enthusiastic, and where the prof is able to drive the best out of her, and she wants to write by herself and she wants to get good. She used it for that other class where she wasn't able to find it in herself to be motivated.
Yeah.
But we work in a system that basically puts the flaw on us. They basically say you're at fault for not finding motivation. And I guess I've become really lenient with people. I think motivation is not something you can manufacture. I think AI is showing us that. It's showing that all the external motivators that we put in place in society, in school, and everywhere, we can actually feel them now. Because whenever we face them, we have the urge to use AI to solve it in a way we wouldn't have to care. But when we face something we actually care about deeply, then AI is no longer something we turn towards. Or maybe we turn towards it with a totally different lens, with the lens of, hey, I would love to get more excited about that. AI, can you help me do this? And this is what I find super interesting when I start to think about it. This is what, when I talk about, I envision a beautiful future somewhere further away. It's because I think we'll all get much, much better at making the difference between our true inner drives and the ones that are imposed on us.
I do think we'll see many more like what I refer to as like Renaissance entrepreneurs, people who are capable of kind of being intersectional in their knowledge base. And Philippe, I think and actually both of you, Erin and Philippe, are great examples of this, right? Like starting from law, going into software development, philosophy, whatever. It's been a pretty broad ranging discussion. I think that is actually an area of entrepreneurial ability that has not been served by the economy pre-AI because you had to be such a specialist to prove value. Now that specialization actually means less, and the ability to translate between different domains is incredibly valuable. And to see a bigger vision and to think on a more societal level is all of a sudden, all of those humanities students should be pretty pleased with themselves at the moment. It's a good study.
I agree. I think this will grow significantly. And for a while now, I've been saying that I think all specialists in other fields should have some sort of understanding of AI, and it should be integrated into school for like many, many fields, because it has been for so long the technologists kind of imposing the technology on other fields, and they struggle to adapt it. Like, even if you think in the medical field, like the doctors were not trained on using AI, and then it's introduced, and then there's this like barrier to entry and like learning curve that has to go about. But I think we'll see a development in education where AI literacy and how to use AI, what it does, what are the risks. Because even as a AI engineer, a trained AI engineer, we did not learn about the bias of AI in school. That was something I had to come about myself. And it's all things that are happening, well, not all, but it is things that are happening accidentally or ignorantly. It's not necessarily like people maliciously doing things wrong. So I think from all aspects, they're going to be teaching other fields about AI, how to use AI, and then they're going to start teaching in the AI field about all of the risks and how it integrates with other domains.
I do think, actually, sorry, just to go back on to a few comments that both of you made that I thought were really interesting. The current economic model for AI is so rent-seeking, to use another economics term, right? But it's so focused on how do we get as many users and how do we train the best AI, and that is completely antithetical to a positive future. And so, to Philippe's point earlier in the conversation, something has to break, or and I said I've never worked with Google. I will never work with Google.
I worked for it when they weren't yet evil.
Before they changed their saying.
You're the thing to kind of see.
But these companies are now. I've forgotten what I was going to say, but hold on, let me see if I can remember. These companies are run by people who want to accumulate power, right? They're so wealthy that money doesn't actually mean anything anymore. It is about power and influence, and it is about protecting them from any kind of risk. And so that means moving the risk to everybody else, right? Outside the corporation, onto society, and also don't make us liable for any of that. And I think that is very clearly, the direction of travel. So unless that breaks, I fear that we are not going to have, that very positive view that I had around like, are we going to be able to come up with AI that can do materials innovation and all that? Because to me, that's the real stuff, right? We don't actually need Mutify apps. We don't, like, these are not things that, like, we don't need to have, apps that create porn of people without their consent. That's not going to help us. But that is what the current model is geared towards.
Yeah, I love that you
I think
mentioned
it might.
viability too. Oh, sorry, Aaron. I was just gonna mention about the fact, the AI Lead Act in the states, where making it possible for consumers to sue organizations for any harm to themselves or to their children, right? And sort of, because for the longest time they've been kind of skirting that responsibility and saying it shouldn't be liable. And so I just wanted to I love that you mentioned that, and just wanted to kind of bring that up. But Aaron, go ahead. Sorry.
No, don't worry. Just building on Anshula's point there about like, will it break? I absolutely think it's going to break. Everyone's in this like space race-esque thing to AGI, as if one company is going to achieve that and then have infinite wealth.
That's exactly right. Here, take the world.
Exactly. We see like, okay, well, OpenAI will come out with a model, and then we just saw Sam Altman be like, guys, this might not go as well because Gemini came out with a new model. Like, everyone is smart, everyone is building the tech at like a similar rate and coming out with a new breakthrough, and then they're being beaten by another breakthrough. So I don't think it will be this big bet for whoever's going to come out on top and win, and now we're all rich. It's going to be, every company is developing, and we get to a point where now all this investment's been made and all this compute is everywhere, but it's dated and it can't do these crazy AGI esque things. So now we're either going to need to see these smaller models be run on this more dated compute, or we're going to see like kind of a democratization of the big tech, in my opinion. I don't know how long that will take, but I don't think this will just be on the rise forever.
Yeah,
Couldn't agree more.
absolutely. I wonder if we could shift then to, we kind of touched on, we touched on the sort of the building, the governance, and I want to touch on measurement, because it seems to be kind of like another, the aspect that's going to kind of help guide us, I suppose. And Angela, you're teaching impact measurement right now at U of T, and if we were to apply your frameworks to AI development, I guess what metrics would I guess show that an AI system is truly beneficial versus just profitable, as you're just mentioning, Aaron? And how do we measure the social impact of AI systems themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of measurement matters in terms of so much of what gets measured is actually dictated by the context in which we're measuring, right? So if we're in a business, they are going to look at profitability, or they're going to look at revenue growth, of course. But things like, I mean, the environmental impact, time savings for staff, learning possibilities, so being able to actually recommend learning based on errors that we see for people. I think for nonprofits, it is kind of, sorry, I'm just going to vent for like a brief moment here, but I do think that nonprofits have such an important role to play in this process. And obviously, Philippe, your organization is one of the good ones for this. But one of the things that I find very frustrating, and I say this as someone who used to work very extensively with nonprofits, is that there's such a fear of AI in general, and also a concern about not being pure enough. And I will stop my rant about progressivism, of which I am a progressive, but where we kind of went wrong. But in the search for purity, they are missing out on the opportunity to be a voice in this conversation that is happening without them. And the reason I bring that up in the context of measurement is that if we're measuring from the perspective of a nonprofit, there would be a lot more that could be done. So looking at things like, and Erin was kind of mentioning this, like, coders learning differently and learning faster, becoming more diverse, we could actually measure that. Mm-hmm. But there's nobody there to measure it. Who is going to measure this? Well, it should be the government, which, I mean, in Canada, I think it's fair to say they're sleeping on this issue. Perhaps it'll become a larger priority at some point. I don't know when that will be. But also nonprofits could actually take a much broader interest in this and use AI. I mean, there's the constant issue that we have now is because taxation continues to decrease as a percentage of total productivity, particularly for higher income earners and all that other stuff. What we end up having is that nonprofits have too much demand. I mean, if they're for-profits and getting paid for this somehow, they'd be making out like gangbusters, right? But they're not. They're nonprofits. And so they're dealing with extremely vulnerable populations that need their support, need their help, and they don't have enough people. And the people that they do have are burning out. So there's so much possibility to have nonprofits adopt AI in a responsible way and to demand certain changes to make it more responsible and become a major customer and use case, but they're choosing not to. And so the measurement that could be happening from that context is not. And that is the end of my rant.
I appreciate. No, it's these are kind of like the unspoken truths, perhaps, or the unrealized truths that are kind of like behind the whole problem, right? And Philippe, when I'm thinking back on sort of the localized, when I'm looking back at Numeno, and I guess Waverly, the you compare it to Netflix and Meta, measuring personalization across, watch patterns, click rates, engagement metrics. You were kind of doing it without centralizing data.
Yeah.
So how do you measure, I guess, varying perspectives of success, either from a nonprofit or from an enterprise perspective, um, uh, as a privacy preserving AI, I suppose.
Yeah, the privacy preserving part is difficult. I think there have been approaches to, you know, at some point I was working closely with people who were interested in something called data trust. So essentially, data repositories that come with a charter, and that charter is designed to protect people, right? In a sense. I think this was a very good way to balance the need for this data to be easily accessible if it's my profile, and my profile is growing more and more and more complex, so that my social algorithm can quote unquote help me. Then it's good for that data to be under a charter I can trust, right? So the idea of data trust was that. Um, but where I'd like to go back a little bit is the question of measurement. I've always loved it because, I mean, we were talking about Google. Again, I'm stressing out. I worked there before they were evil. Yesterday night, actually, I was with all my friends from like old alumni from Google. We went for our annual dinner. It was so much fun. But everybody's left except a couple, and they're all like gloomy and stuff. Like, oh yeah, this is what you get for staying with them. Anyway, but joking aside, what what I learned at Google is something called good heart law. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the way in which I like to describe it is, as soon as you put a metric on the wall, if you incentivize it, then whatever you were trying to get to is going to stop being true. And at Google, it was so obvious because we invented these metrics to make sure that we would put the best link at the top of the search result page. So, hey, if a user click on it, it's good. That was the first metric. But then, hey, the internet adapts. The internet is this weird living thing. So people learn to put clickbait titles. And suddenly people would click on stuff and hate the pages they landed on. So Google went back and they changed the metric. And the metric became, hey, if someone clicks on a link but don't come back to the search result page within 30 seconds, it's good. And then the internet evolved so that the page is loaded slower or whatever, right? So you always have this weird game between the person who sets the metric and the person or the system who fights it, right? And so this is where with Waverly, the idea was like, okay, let's go to the bedrock. And it's hard to talk about the bedrock for a company because they work in complex system, but you can go to the bedrock for humans. And this is where social networks were clearly wrong. They model us. When you're using a social network, you're using a system that is trying really hard to build a model of you, to predict what you will click on, which video you will watch until the end, how to keep you on the platform, watching more ads, giving them more money. So they build a very complex model of you as a user. But that model is a very partial version of you. A friend is doing the same thing. When you're interacting with a friend, they're also trying to understand you so that they can be a good friend. But they are looking for it in a much richer way. They understand that you're never going to say you want to go to the gym, but deep down you want to go to the gym, right? There's like some version of you who wants to go to the gym. There's some version of you who wants to have these difficult conversations with new people that you don't yet know. You want to work on solving the world problems, even if every time you try, you feel like it's hard. Like we have that in us, but the systems we built, like social networks, are deliberately deaf to this, right? So the idea of Waverly is, how do you go to the bedrock? How do you do that? And the idea was, let's have a conversation. Now you can have a conversation with the computer thanks to LLM. Let's use this so that the computer doesn't try to model you as a click metric or as a time watched metric or whatever. It tries to talk. It tries to use language in order to figure out, how you feel, and how you feel based on the experience you're having on social networks, how to change that experience in the direction that would make you feel better. The thing is, when you start down that route, you end up where I am today with these crazy questions about, what is consciousness, what makes us human, stuff like that. So I think we are progressing on this. I think as we make progress on that, we will end up with a technological landscape that is better at helping us be who we want. I don't think it will be based on classical metrics. I think it will be based more on the richer stuff we use as humans to understand each other, which is language.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's been, I just wanted to highlight this message that we got. Just thanking everyone for this, because it's been a very thought-provoking and I guess emotional provoking discussion. So I just wanted to, kind of acknowledge that and thank you all for a really amazing conversation. Given the time, we're kind of in overtime right now, and I just want to respect your time and all that. I guess maybe in closing, then, if we could, Philippe, why don't we start with you? What is it about, I guess, what would your guiding star be, for your AI work and vision for the next 5 years? And maybe from a Canadian perspective, like Montreal being the AI hotbed that it is, what is it about, what untapped, I guess, superpower are we not leveraging, or can we leverage, do you think, or will leverage to compete with Silicon Valley, with China scale? And,
I mean,
curious, we'll take what you think.
Yeah, my answer is pretty simple. Let's keep being ourselves. There are some changes that I look at that I'm a bit concerned about. In Quebec in particular, some laws are looking like they want to make it harder for immigrants to come in. And like, wow, I mean, that diversity is what made us, right? And I think these diverse conversations I'm having with people who have totally different perspectives than I do is what is enriching me and my thoughts about this entire thing. So I'd be like, let's be careful. Let's not try to imitate something or someone too much. I do believe that the future is going to be coming from unexpected places. I do think we can be one of them. And the combination we have is this really deep expertise in AI, but also these weird values that are progressive and humanistic. And like, we find that a lot less in the Valley. So, hey, maybe we're that right balance. Let's try to take care of it. Let's try not to change it too quickly, too brutally. And also, let's invest in NGOs. I'm going to say what Anshula said. It's like, okay, VCs showed that they were pretty great at funding innovation, but they also showed that they were pretty great at destroying the planet. So can we find a bunch of nerds, a bunch of people with great values that want to build businesses slightly differently, with growth dynamics that are not necessarily the growth dynamics a VC is looking for, but that are healthier and that will build that future where AI is actually more of a partner in building a beautiful future?
Thanks, Philippe. Erin?
For my guiding star, I would say, like what Philippe is saying about things adapting and not necessarily holding on to anything how it is, just keeping up with how things are changing, and then keeping the values that I have. I've been guided by that away from actually building the software into this new field. So I think keeping up with everything that's going on and letting my values guide me, and then hopefully helping others come to this realization and be educated so that they can implement AI in the most responsible way. and disseminate that throughout Canada.
Nice. And Anshula.
I think I would quote one of my favorite philosophers, Albert Camus, and I think there's kind of two concepts that he talks a lot about absurdism, and in his essay, the Rebel, at the end of it, he says, he talks about how rebellion is actually an act of community, because we often do it not just for ourselves but for others as well. And I do think that engaging with AI and trying to do it in an ethical way at the current stage is an act of rebellion, because there's all these kinds of issues with it. And so I think that's really important for us to continue doing, to continue engaging constructively and positively, while also being very aware. And I'll bring in a second Camus kind of idea, this idea of a Sisyphean struggle, where Sisyphus was constantly kind of dragging a rock up a hill, and then it would kind of roll back down because the gods would push it. It was supposed to be a big punishment, but Camus always kind of stated we should imagine Sisyphus as happy. And to me, I think that is very much where we're at, the joy of engaging in this, being in this moment in time. I think is really important for us to not get beaten down, to continue looking for positive solutions, and to do that in a way that is, true to who we are, and making sure that the technology is serving us and not the other way around. And by us, I mean that more broadly, not just humans, but also the planet.
Awesome. Thank you. What an amazing way to end this conversation. And I love that we are united in our rebelliousness, and communing here together. It's fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. And before we go, I want to make sure that, Anshula, if anyone wants to reach out to you, and potentially collaborate, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, yeah. Reach me on LinkedIn, I think, for sure. Yeah.
Same here, LinkedIn.
Awesome. Okay, no problem. And Erin?
Yep, LinkedIn works as well.
All right, we're all for the LinkedIn. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that this would maybe first of, maybe we can reconvene in a year or so and see what happens. If we're still around, maybe AGI will hit us sooner than we thought. And the different, OpenAI's AGI and Google's AGI, and they'll all be battling, and we'll be the little ants, maybe, ducking for cover.
By then we'll be able to send our digital twin to the podcast.
That's right. I mean,
that's right.
AI will be running that podcast to make fun of us.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Look,
guys.
I am conscious.
Thank you, Carlos. This is so fun.
Thank you so much,
It's
Carlos.
a lot of fun, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I'm honored.
Guys, see
All
you
right, guys. Take care. Thank you so much.
Too.
Thank you.